Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon and today I'm giving my first thoughts on the trial of the Chicago 7.
Well, that was a movie.
So the Trial of the Chicago 7 was written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. It's starring Mark Rylance, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Eddie Redmayne, and Sacha Baron Cohen. So in case you don't know the plot of this film, it centers around a group of people who are all put on trial for their involvement in the riots and protests surrounding the Democratic National Convention in 1968. It's not just a court case movie though, it's more of a political drama because it gets into the politics behind the court case. With the police brutality and the corruption in the government and everything behind that, it was very sketchy, so it gets into all of that. And I'm not one for political dramas generally because everybody always has a bias. That's just a fact. You cannot present anything without a bias in art. It's not possible. Everybody always has to put their slant in. I don't know if that's literally true, but it always does happen. And so this movie is slanted. Very slightly. I'm not an expert of the events that this movie are based on. I'm really not. But I tried to do as much research as I could to figure out how accurate is this movie really. And I found out for the most part it is accurate. Obviously they do change some things to make it better for a movie and condense it down and all of that. But for the most part it seemed that everything that was changed solely to make it more easy to digest in movie form. It wasn't to change the content of what happened. But there are still some things in it that I know they weren't trying to change anything, but it felt manipulative at times. This movie does a good job of trying to let you know that even the good guys are not perfect. There's disagreements between the Chicago 7 all the time. They hate each other at times. They're disagreeing a lot. And they end up doing things that they regret. But I will also say that this movie tries to paint the good guys as somewhat of martyrs, where it's just because they did something wrong doesn't mean it's their fault. It tries to explain away certain moments where they incited violence as, oh well, it was just mob mentality, it's not what they actually wanted. And so I kind of struggle with that a little bit, but because of that, this movie raised a lot of really good questions that I enjoyed thinking about. Like, how do you judge a movement? By the leaders? Or by the followers? If the leaders of a movement are peaceful protesters, can you judge them for the offspring of that movement that are violent and incite violence? There is an originator to a movement, and just because there are people that are a part of that movement doesn't mean that they represent the whole movement, if that makes sense. Like I said, this movie makes it pretty clear none of these people are perfect, and that's a good thing. I don't want perfect people in a movie, especially when I know that these characters are based on real life. I don't want you to pretend that these characters are perfect because I know that they're not. And so that's why it does bug me that at times it does feel like these characters are a bit contrived, because I know that they're based on real persons, that these characters represent real people. So why is it that they feel fake at times? It's kind of obvious at times that they're trying to make these people into caricatures. They're trying to make them into not necessarily role models, but into something. They're trying to make them into maybe something a little more palatable or representative of something else. I'm not sure. It just really gave off the vibe a couple times that they were changing stuff. And I do know that they changed at least one thing that has somewhat of a major impact, because at the end of the movie, a character gives a speech that when I was fact-checking this movie, I found out was not at that time. And I understand moving around times of things to make it better for a movie, but the speech in this movie had to do with the war in Vietnam. That was the reason that they were protesting in the first place. They were protesting the war. Something that we all have a right to do as American citizens is protest. And so that's what they were trying to exercise their right to protest for, was for the war, and I get that. But it kind of skewed the attention of the movie, because the movie wasn't about the protests. It was about your right to protest and what happens when the government tries to take away that right. So to then try to shift the focus of the movie at the end to Vietnam feels disingenuous, because I think everybody can agree kids dying at war is a bad thing. Whether or not you're pro or anti-war or whatever, we all agree we don't want our troops dying. That's just pretty obvious. So to try to end the movie on a note like, come on, you all agree with me, felt a bit manipulative. And so it's kind of frustrating because you're distracting the point, and by distracting the point, trying to manipulate the audience into thinking they agree with you. I'm not going to say whether I do or not, because that's not important, but my point is they're distracting the point to try to manipulate you into thinking you agree with them whether you do or not. And that bugs me from a filmmaking standpoint. If you are going to do something, be genuine about it. Don't try to manipulate me. got through that seamlessly. It's so hard to talk about this movie without getting political about it, but that's the best way I can do it. I want to judge this movie as a movie, not as anything political, because honestly, it doesn't need to be. It is a darn good movie on its own. Even if this movie was just about any old trial case, it was well made. And I was honestly shocked with how good some of the acting was. Now, not all of it was great. I will point out that Sacha Baron Cohen and his other hippie friend were probably the weakest actors in this movie. They still had some good moments in there, and so did all of the actors. I don't want to lean too far to the side, though, that this movie is perfect either. There are flaws in this movie, and they're not a lot, but I do want to mention them. This movie, along with having a bit of that preachy, and I'm obviously right, so you're gonna believe me, right? type vibe, it also brings with that a bit of the everybody clapped vibe. Whenever a moment happens in court that is a heroic moment or somebody says something that's gosh darn right, the whole audience starts applauding, and I'm like, I wasn't there. I don't know this, but I just... I don't think that's how it happened, because this was obviously a very divisive political moment in history. In this country, people were divided on this topic. So why would it be that aside from the judge and the jury, everybody else was obviously on the side of the Chicago 7? That doesn't make any sense. Why would everybody be applauding every time they do the slightest thing? It's just silly when you take a step back and think about it. It's like somebody's daydream of like those stupid memes that people are pointing out like, oh, that story's fake or whatever. And everybody always responds to that with, oh, and everybody clapped, or it's true, I was the pen. That's kind of how these scenes felt at times, and it's kind of frustrating because it cheapens the overall importance of this movie, because the movie is important. The plot is important. The content matter of this movie was important, but the movie felt so high and mighty and self-righteous about it, at times it really cheapened what it was trying to say, because it felt like it was talking down to you, like, listen here, kiddies, I am going to teach you a lesson about history, because you obviously aren't paying attention. And sure, I had never heard this story before. I don't know how many people have or have not. It was never a story that I had heard before watching this movie. So yes, I was ignorant to everything that happened in this situation. I had to do lots of research, like I said, but I don't need somebody talking down to me about what happened and saying, listen here, I know exactly what happened and you're going to listen to me because I'm right about it. Like, just kind of present it a little more, honestly, a little more raw, and let me put it together. Because if you're really right, and if you're really truthful, and if you're really just representing and presenting the facts to me, then I don't need your manipulation to agree with you. And this movie, despite presenting things that felt very valid, still manipulated. And it really didn't need to, and that's frustrating. That aside, I really did enjoy this movie. I don't want to say that I loved it. I don't want to say that it was great, but it was definitely good. I'd put it in that 7 out of 10 category because there's really good pacing. There's mostly good acting. The director obviously knows what he's doing. He's done a lot of movies, and this is not his first rodeo show. The writing, although has some cheesy dialogue at times, the majority of it's good. So this movie, for the most part, is a very well-made movie by an expert director that's been in the business for a while. So that's why the annoying parts are a little bit frustrating, but for the most part, this movie does hold its own, and I'm really glad that I watched it, and will probably watch it again eventually, which I can't say for all movies I've seen this year. But once again, I cannot speak to the authenticity of this film. I can't talk about the historical accuracy of the movie, or the plot, or the dialogue, although I know that some of it was lifted from the actual transcripts. I can't tell you that they said it the right way. They even talk in this movie about how just a written word can be completely manipulated with how you say it. So it's very hard to know how accurate this movie is because, like I said, I wasn't aware of this story. I wasn't alive during it. I don't know much about it at all. But just from a unbiased, middle-of-the-road viewpoint, it seemed like a pretty good story. A little biased and a little corny, but definitely good and worth watching. If you haven't, you should check it out. So that was my opinion. I know it was short and sweet, but there's not a whole lot of spoilers to get into. There's not a whole lot of deep plot points that are worth pointing out or talking about. It's just a good movie that has a good message that, especially right now, it needed to be talked about. So I'm glad it was. And I'm glad it wasn't as biased as it could have been. With these political dramas, You know what I'm talking about. They always suck. And this one was surprisingly good. So that's what I had to think. Please let me know in the comments below what you guys thought. Also, don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Thanks, guys. Bye.